also contributes to the WWF network. And she will continue the flow that we are following from the Restoration Day. We move from global perspective to public policies, local communities, territorial perspectives. We talk about innovative finance, and we will continue on innovative finance, actually. And this is a hot topic for our COP that we are right now. So, Barbara Bonfim, please, the floor is yours, and you have 1 hour to moderate the session.
All right, thank you, Taru. Thank you all for being here. It's a great pleasure. As Taru said, we are here the whole day talking about restoration, right? Because restoration is complicated, right? We can't address it in 10 minutes, 30 minutes, or even 1 hour. So we put together six sessions, inviting more than, 35 specialists, leaders, agenda setters, right? So what is different about this space here? So we're going to have 1 hour and 15 minutes to have a dialogue, right, with multiple leaders and agenda setters in this space. And the difference, I think, here in this title compared to other sessions is the carbon component, right? So we believe there is an opportunity, right, for us to connect the need to restore millions of hectares of ecosystems in a fair way, in a just way, with the opportunity for carbon finance, with carbon finance. It's not easy. If it were easy, we would not be here with all of you, right? We need all of you, all these brains together to tackle these challenges. So today, conversation will explore how restoration can be designed as a nature-based solution for climate mitigation and adaptation with strong social environmental safeguards, because we think it can work, right? So we're going to have different leaders, right, representing the organizations to bring different angles. So I would like to invite to the panel, first and foremost, Neni Barizabe. Please welcome to the floor. He is the project coordinator of the Hydrocarbon Pollution Remediation Project, HYPREP, at Nigeria's Federal Ministry of the Environment, with extensive expertise in biomonitoring, restoration ecology, and sustainable management of Niger Delta aquatic ecosystems. Welcome. Next, I want to, thank you. He came from Nigeria. It's not very close. Next, Stella Napanu. She is the Indigenous Peoples Outreach and Policy Senior Manager at ICVCM. She is specialized in ecosystem health and community conservation in Kenya, and also serves in leadership roles in the Kenya Wildlife Conservancy Association and the EU Youth Sounding Board. Thank you so much for being here with us. Next, I want to invite Anshari Rahman. He's the Policy Director at Gen Zero. Welcome. Anshari Rahman is Director of Strategy and Development, Policy Analytics at Gen Zero, leading work on carbon markets, international standards, and climate policy. Then I want to invite Anand Punja. He is the Director of Stakeholder Relations Engagement Team at the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC. Welcome. He has more than 25 years of experience in social, environmental, and economic sustainability, strengthening FSC's partnerships with civil society organizations across value chains, carbon, biodiversity, and restoration finance markets. And last but not least, my colleague Martin Perez Lara from WWF US, who is the Director of Forest Monitoring, working with Nature-Based Solutions Origination Platform. Thank you all and welcome. So the goal for today's session is to hear from these leaders, their perspectives on how can we integrate carbon finance in the restoration agenda, with restoration as a nature-based solutions that delivers for climate mitigation and adaptation. We're going to do a first round of questions, and then we're going to see how it goes. I want to leave the panelists very free to bring their perspectives, very free. People end up self-regulating, you know, it is how it is. But then if we have time, we open for a second question or to the audience. So first, Martin, I wanted to hear from you from a global institution perspective. How can ecosystem restoration be positioned as a high integrity and high quality nature-based solution ensuring it is fully aligned with climate finance principles and effectively integrated into Article 6 cooperative approaches under the Paris Agreement? It's a big question, so feel free to bring your
It is.
perspective. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So there is three components in the question. So we need to connect climate finance principles, Article 6, and the opportunity to leverage restorations into high integrity processes. So effectively, it's a hard question. Let's explore what is happening in climate finance and in Article 6 regarding restoration. As you know, Article 6 have two articles that are being designed. The Article 6, so three articles, but two that can be denominated as a carbon mechanism. That is the Article 6.2 and the Article 6.4. So Article 6.2 is being designed as a mechanism to allow partnerships between countries. And you can include in this partnership activities in all the sectors, and that include forestry sectors. But because the nature of the relationships into the Article 6.2 is between countries, the main mechanism that is being implemented is jurisdictional approaches. And when you see the activities, the forestry activities included in jurisdictional approaches, it is focused in avoided emissions by deforestation. So there is no still place for implement. It is theoretically possible, but when you analyze what agreements are in place, there is not a huge implementation for restoration purposes. So there is a place where we could formulate, and we are working, for example, in programs to try to generate jurisdictional approaches that could connect with these articles. If you analyze the general structure of both, Article 6.4 will allow the integration of private funding in the implementation of any activity that you are included in the program. Article 6.2, as I mentioned, is focusing in countries. So summarizing this, if we want to try to increase the high integrity or generate high integrity in restoration in the Article 6 mechanisms, we need to focus the attention in the generation of projects and the methodological development in the case of the Article 6.4. Yes, for now.
Thank you, Martin. Yes, as Martin mentioned, jurisdictional approaches. I think if we go to the audience and ask, what is their perception of jurisdictional approaches, is not an easy answer, right? But at WWF, we are trying to create bridges, because one key word of jurisdictional approaches is public-private partnerships, right? So bringing these different actors together to make sure that programs can actually work, right, and be implemented. And then one of these actors are also the science component, right? So I want to direct now the question to Neni Barizabe, right? To hear from your perspective and your experience, what do countries and regions that are in early stages of aligning nature restoration with climate and carbon finance need the most?
Thank you very much. So I think there are context-specific enablers, but the common driver or the common enabler that goes through all of the context is effective collaboration. Because in our own context in the Niger Delta, HYPREP is restoring over 3,000 hectares of oil-degraded mangroves, which is the world's largest restoration of oil-degraded mangroves. And in terms of carbon finance, we are not looking for money to actually do the restoration, because our restoration is paid for by the polluter pays principle. So we have already restored 530 hectares of oil-degraded mangroves, and we are moving into the phase 2. So overall, like I said earlier, we'll restore over 3,000 hectares. Now, the issue with the restoration is sustainability, because after a couple of years of monitoring, then we will leave the restored mangroves, and the communities will have to conserve the mangroves. So how do they conserve the mangroves if they depend wholly on the mangroves? It means that there is the need to expand their livelihood opportunities. And so we think that in aligning the restoration to climate finance and action, it is important to leverage carbon credit to create alternative livelihood opportunities. And that will lead to sustainability of the mangroves. Because if you leave it to the communities without providing alternative livelihood opportunities, then they will overharvest the mangroves, and disturbed mangroves emit methane. That's what the science says. So in order to enable the restored mangroves to contribute to carbon sequestration and mitigation and adaptation, then there is the need to create opportunities that will support conservation of the restored mangrove areas. So the key thing is effective collaboration that will lead to sustainability.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, so collaboration, so we can ensure the quality and the integrity, right, of these interventions. We often hear about projects that do not do so well, right, and we lack the opportunities to understand what happened, right? So I want to invite Stella from ICVCM to tell us a little bit more about integrity and quality, right? Because it is so important for us to restore the ecosystems that we care about. Thank you for sharing the mangrove ecosystem, how they are so important for the communities there. So Stella, how does ICVCM embed integrity and transparency into carbon finance, while also ensuring that indigenous peoples and local communities' rights, knowledge, and priorities are fully respected and safeguarded? And maybe you want to explain a little bit more about ICVCM. I'm not sure if the audience is familiar, so please, you have the floor. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So for those who may not be familiar with the work of the ICVCM, so ICVCM is an independent, not-for-profit governance body for carbon markets. We believe that we need integrity first in the market before we can scale it. And we understand that high-integrity carbon markets have the potential to unlock finance, critical finance that will otherwise not be deployed, right? So within the ICVCM, we have the 10 core carbon principles, the CCPs. Pretty sure you might be familiar with the term CCPs. So our core carbon principles, these are 10 science-based core carbon principles that create a threshold for what high-integrity, high-quality credits look like. So these CCPs, so what we do also within the ICVCM is assess methodologies and assess programs against these core carbon principles. And so these core carbon principles require programs and methodologies to ensure that they make credits that create genuine impact to the environment on emissions, support sustainable development, and also protect nature. So while also this CCPs also require that these carbon crediting programs and projects have good governance systems, show that there is going to be transparency in the way that they are dealing with their work, ensuring that there is tracking, and ensuring also that there is third-party verification. It also requires, in the context of indigenous peoples and local communities, it also requires that these programs and these projects have clear guidance, tools, and procedures in place to ensure that there is safeguarding and there is sustainable development. And this includes verifying that the projects have actually assessed and mitigated risks for both indigenous peoples and local communities. So by ensuring that they operate with FPIC and making sure that FPIC is a continuous process, by also ensuring that there is transparency in how these benefits are actually shared, and making sure that communities actually are able to access this information on their benefit sharing and actually are on the table to decide how these benefits will actually be seen. Because oftentimes we look at communities as beneficiaries to these projects, right? But we need to look at them as equal partners to this project. That's the only time that there is going to be high integrity in the market. So within the ICVCM, we also have 13 continuous improvement work programs. So we understand that the carbon market is continuously evolving, and we have to evolve with the market, right? So these critical mechanisms that that advance the conversation within the voluntary carbon market space, ensuring that we still, go ahead with the evolving science, evolving innovative approaches, and also emerging technology. So we gather diverse experts across, different market actors, including indigenous peoples and local communities, to keep informing the work that we are doing so that they can feed into the core carbon principles and our assessment framework. So yeah, and within also our governance system, because all the assessments that we do are usually passed by the governance board. And within our governance board, we have three seats reserved for indigenous peoples and local communities, so that they can assess also this, they can make sure that all the assessments that have been done actually, ensure that communities are at the center of this conversation. Because one of our core pillars of the Integrity Council is building market confidence and ensuring, we create a market where communities are at the center of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella. So yeah, there is a lot going on, right, in all these groups that ICVCM has to support their work. And so we understand that designing, implementing, monitoring ecosystem restoration projects require a lot of resources, right? Human resources, monetary resources. So let's hear from Anshari from Gen Zero. From Gen Zero's perspective, what do investors need to see in terms of risk, return, policy certainty, and pipeline quality to be ready to mobilize capital that is needed to scale billions for nature and carbon markets, especially in emerging economies?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Anshari. So maybe by way of background, Gen Zero is an investment firm, and we invest in technology, nature, and carbon markets. Right. To answer your question, I think as we invest in quite a number of these nature projects globally, there are three broad risks that we face. So the first one is a regulatory risk. Right. As we invest in a lot of nature-based projects, whether it's a reductions type project or restoration project, the crediting period and the investment period straddle multiple NDC periods and long time horizons. And this exposes us to multiple regulatory U-turns, regulatory risks, and the broad infrastructure in the Paris Agreement, the 5-year NDC cycles, and long-term low emissions development strategy. What the host countries put out on this, these are broad guidance for us. And then we look at specifically what are the policies for their land sector management and their targets for land sector decarbonization. So those are how we kind of mitigate regulatory risk. Second risk is execution risk. So project developers looking at restoration projects, what's the survival rates of your seedlings, also in terms of the growth rates, how do you adapt to changing weather patterns, right? And it takes many years for trees to grow in restoration projects, right? And there are many things that can happen in the meantime. So the track record of the project developers, the familiarity with the local context, what works here might not work in another geography or another biome or another jurisdiction. So those are essentially broadly wrapped in the second aspect, which is execution risk. Now the third risk is really methodology risk, right? Today, let's look at one of very specific example. When you look at a new methodology under Vera VM47, which deals with afforestation and reforestation projects, right, which has received CCP label. Now a key feature that is now new in this methodology is the use of dynamic baselines. It's great, right? It improves precision on how you avoid overestimation and overcrediting. However, we also have to understand the potential trade-offs for investments, because it entails uncertainty in terms of the yields and what the carbon curve would look like, right? And that's a risk that we investors and financiers will have to look at. That's all fine and good, right? If ICVCM CCP labels become the main benchmark for quality and there is confidence in the market, then yes, right? On top of the CCP labels, we also look at ratings, project level ratings. We don't buy offsets, but we know buyers, they do reference project ratings. And generally speaking, there is an observation that there is a price premium attached with higher quality projects that may have CCP labels, but across different ratings, you can actually fetch a different price. That leaves probably I think the biggest issue that we need to tackle today to solve for how we want to scale restoration projects. And I would throw in forest conservation and reductions projects in the mix, which is how do we scale the demand, right? And the demand today is quite weak. Removals type projects, which are typically constitute your restoration projects, there is demand, and there is demand from big tech, right? And they are buying at a very significant price premium with high quality carbon credits, but we need to scale this up, right? And the challenge, as mentioned in 6.4, is that some of the rules around permanence is quite prohibitive to nature-based solutions, even nature-based removals, right? How do we ensure that the 6.4 mechanism, PECM, actually serves developing countries, as you pointed out? And largely speaking, the opportunity set in developing countries are in land sector activities and nature-based solutions. When you look at Southeast Asia, we are based in Singapore, and we've did some studies with Google, Temasek, Bain, around the green growth opportunities in Southeast Asia. About the largest opportunity set is in bioeconomy, right? That includes nature, conservation, restoration, agriculture, land use projects and interventions. Only 3% of the full mitigation potential have been tapped in the region. It's both good and bad. There's unrealized potential, but it's also a way for the region to start to move and start using CCP label methodologies, use project ratings to originate a new supply of high quality carbon credits that meet the demand. On the demand side, countries are also coming together to provide air cover for corporates. So if you've seen some of the announcements earlier this week, there are several coalitions, right? Brazil has a coalition for linking emissions trading schemes across different jurisdictions. There is one led by Singapore, UK, and Kenya around how do we scale carbon markets. And it's really to provide some clarity around how corporates can use carbon credits with confidence. And this leads me to my last point before I end, which is I think today the topic is around scaling restoration, but we need to avoid false dichotomies in the global discourse for carbon markets because we need all solutions at scale today, right? And so this debate around reductions versus removals, technology versus nature, whether you need corresponding adjustments for corporate voluntary claims, all these we need to avoid. We need to address the integrity at the principle space, which is what ICVCM is doing. In short, you can have high quality restoration projects, you can have high quality nature-based projects with CCP labels, with high project level ratings that we need the demand for from corporates and from countries. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And as you noted, in this carbon finance world, there are a lot of technicalities, right? Lots of jargons, lots of words that mean a lot for quality and integrity. And in this space, many organizations play a very important role. So let's hear from Anand Punja from FSC. FSC describes itself as a credible partner, right, to support climate finance and nature-based solutions. So based on this role, how does FSC ensure that restoration projects funded by carbon markets maintain high environmental and social integrity, particularly when channeling investments from impact investors who may be new to forest restoration? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. This is a world that FSC is moving more and more into a more kind of mainstream world. We've been in and around it for about 5-6 years, but through a kind of more anecdotal payment for ecosystem services scheme that is called Verified Impact. So but ultimately, we're a brand that's existed. We're a brand and a system that's existed for 30 years. The way we're governed and the way we develop our standards adds credibility. It's done through the normal tripart. Well, our normal tripart system that we have in three-chamber system that we have. So all of our methodologies, all of our technical work is done through member-based groups and technical expert groups. So one level of credibility about developing new methodologies, which we're seeking to do. And we'll be starting our own carbon and biodiversity credit methodologies in the new year as well through this tripart system. So perspectives from the business world, from ENGOs, and I'm happy to say that on both the carbon and the biodiversity groups, WWF have a seat on both, and also the social aspect as well. So bringing in indigenous communities' rights, benefit sharing mechanisms, etc. as well. So that means that it does take a bit more time, and it will. And we're developing those methodologies really to look at how we can bring integrity back into the market, because we do have projects and areas that are FSC certified out there that have that project developers are working with through the Vera system, for instance, and they're looking at saying, with what's happened in that Vera world over the last 18 months, 2 years in particular, is kind of they're very much looking to add more integrity through FSC certification as well for the co-benefits, both the nature benefits and the biodiversity benefits in particular, but also the social benefits as well. So that's the kind of, effectively we have those good standards on the ground. They cover things like FPIC, workers' rights, high conservation values over 6 categories, monitoring and evaluation. So high-level principles that are then transferred onto the ground, which our normal forest stewards that have been supplying consumer markets up to now, they all put that into place, and up to now they've been associated more with providing timber, fiber to the consumer world. But what we're trying to do is connect that to this growing world of finance, and to put them at the center and to give them more options and choices to choose finance market or income sources, and to tap into different markets, so that over a landscape in the forests that they're managing, they have more choice for their income. Do they produce this bioeconomy model, right? Do they produce? Do they restore? And do they conserve? Where do they conserve? So it just empowers forest stewards with a more of a kind of one-stop shop, if you like, than looking at other systems. So a more integrated way to think about how we can access private markets of all sorts, from consumer to carbon finance to biodiversity credit markets as well, in with one kind of core standard in the forest, and then kind of seek to connect them to markets. And that's what we're traditionally pretty good at in the consumer markets, and now are growing that into other markets. The other side of it is also our claims system, our claims trademark standards as well. So we have standards around trademark, how you can use trademarks and sell FSC products in the consumer world, and they're coming into being also translated into more of this carbon finance, biodiversity finance world as well. So our claims infrastructure is also going to be transferred across. So we've got the supply side integrity as well as the demand side integrity as well, developing through that system. And all of that is then, of course, done through third-party auditing and verification, and then the overarching body that looks after all of that, making sure that the system is working and highly assured, is Assurance Services International, ASI, which then looks to make sure that the auditors are doing their job and that the system is effectively working and providing another layer of assurance to the market and confidence. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, so there is a lot of work going on. So thanks for bringing us these relevant points. And then we have time for another round of questions, and then likely open to the public. Yeah. So Martin is all happy. Martin, I wanted to hear from your perspective, your experience in your role at WWF. What is special about this ecosystem restoration niche that makes sense to work with carbon finance, right? There is an opportunity, but there are challenges too, right? As we can see from all the panelists, there's so much involved, right? So why should we continue attempting, right, to combine the scaling of high integrity ecosystem restoration with carbon finance?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that came for my mind when I tried to think the interconnection between carbon finance and restoration is the need of restoration is huge on the world. And carbon will cover all the needs of restoration. Also, will cover all the costs. The prices of the carbon around the world could be into the range of $5 to $20. And when you analyze how many money you need to implement a restoration model, and if you assign all the costs of the restoration of the carbon, the costs overcome the $100. And anyone is buying carbon at $100. So the first point is, we need to mix finance. We need to maintain grant fluxes, the interaction with public funds to restore, and identify what is the right place of the carbon in this ecosystem, in this finance ecosystem. But there is an opportunity, and where is the opportunity? So now we have some opportunities that became from the demand of corporates, implementing mainly, until this moment, voluntary carbon market methodologies that is being demanding for the corporate sector. We also have a huge opportunity into the inclusion of restoration into the Article 6. As I mentioned, the need to develop projects that include restoration into the 6.2, as you enforce, Anand, the possibility to push as a parties the development of methodologies by the supervisory body to include nature, and probably will be easy the inclusion of nature in the Article 6.4 via removals and restoration that the emission reduction. So it's a fight that we need to choose but execute. If we take the decision to include nature in the Article 6.4, there is an opportunity to scale the finance. Also, how we understand the double counting and the rules. So there is some positions that are trying to mix all the mechanisms and try to have and to make it fight. My personal position, not as an institution, my personal position is that more mechanisms interacting in different and covering different spaces of the additionality in the implementation of restoration will be better than just have just one that will be applicable in all the cases. So how we design accountable rules to make and increase the probability to increase the finance in one place that is being restoring in long term, and that is another thing that we need to deal. What is the science about the permanence of the restoration? How we can explain that the restoration is a long-term process where we need to change cultural approaches in more than, 10, 20, 40, 100 years. But it's a thing that is not being solved with one mechanism and the rules in one mechanism. So summarizing this, rules that can demonstrate operable functionality for restoration, increasing the possibility to integrate and synergies between different mechanisms is where I see most opportunities to scale restoration using carbon as a vehicle that will cover part of the effort to implement restoration processes.
Thank you so much, Martin. Yeah, and in all this, we see the role of science, right? Every time I'm not sure what to do, I go back to my carbon science, background to see what makes sense, right? And then, Neribari, I would like to hear more from you, right, on this, right? Collaboration between science and community work, right? What are some of the opportunities for the collaboration, the science and community work that could help make scaling of restoration feasible in your context? Thank you.
All right, so in my context, HyPrep that I coordinate is carrying out the world's largest restoration of, started by training the community people, what we refer to as mangrove vanguards. And these are young men and women that we provided them with grant, and they were able to set up mangrove nurseries. And they are able to supply the seedlings to the restorative planting contractors. And that has expanded their livelihood opportunities in the local community. So restoration can be used to create a kind of conservation and restoration knowledge legacy in the communities. Now, in terms of collaboration, we can look at it from two dimensions, technical and financial. So in the area of technical collaboration, in our own context, even if we have money to restore about 3,000 hectares of oil-degraded areas in the Niger Delta, there is also need to continue to monitor the restored areas. And so even if we have built the capacity of the local people on how to set up mangrove nurseries, on how to do the planting, there is also the need to enhance their capacity in the area of participatory monitoring and verification. Okay? And that's where climate finance comes to play. Then there's also the need to build the capacity of the people in carbon accounting. Okay? Carbon accounting, so how do they quantify the carbon stock in the mangroves in terms of knowing their contribution to global climate mitigation, as well as even their contributions to carbon adaptation. Of course, our restoration monitoring data shows that there is tremendous recovery of biodiversity. And so it brings us to the convergence between carbon asset in terms of how much carbon the restored mangroves are sequestering, as well as biodiversity recovery. So one of the objectives of our restoration is to enhance the local fisheries. And once the local fisheries of the people is enhanced, what that means is that because they rely on the mangrove wood for energy, to dry their fish, to cook, and things like that, it means that they will turn attention to harvesting the restored mangroves. So how do we prevent that? There is need for technical support in terms of providing maybe alternative energy sources like solar, clean cook stoves that will reduce the amount of wood that they use in drying fish and in cooking. So that is an aspect of technical support. There's also the aspect of equitable benefit sharing. Because in our context, the mangroves that we are restoring belongs to the entire community. So it's communally owned. So if there is a form of carbon credit through conservation of the restored mangroves, how will it be distributed in the community or applied in the community in such a way that will not lead to conflict? So there is need for technical support in defining equitable benefit sharing mechanisms in our context. That in all of this, money is required. So financial collaboration is necessary. Even if in our context, carbon investment is not about the actual restoration, but it's about investing in the sustainability of the restored mangroves. Because if the restored mangrove is not conserved, then the restored mangrove cannot contribute to global carbon mitigation. However, we also need financial support in terms of climate investment in the Niger Delta region, because the, Global Mangrove Watch shows that there are about 22,000 hectares of restorable mangrove areas in the Niger Delta. So what we are doing currently is restoring 3,000 hectares of oil-degraded mangroves. What about the other 19,000? So it requires investment in restoration. It requires investment in mechanisms or processes that will enable the local communities to conserve the restored mangroves. And all of that also depend on what I will call community science, because we don't need too much of science in the restoration of community-level restored areas, or the conservation of community-level restored areas. What we need is actually community science, building local capacity of non-science citizens to be able to drive the conservation and be able to do the planting and the protection, the monitoring for the benefit of the current generation and future generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, some keywords that I got from you is community ownership, right? It is debatable whether we need more science papers out, but we definitely need knowledge brokers, right? People making the bridges between complicated science papers to real actual application, right? And implementation, right? I think science is very key for humanity, but even better if it's useful and applicable, right? So in this sense of community sense, Stella, and I know that you mentioned some in your first answer, but I wanted you to elaborate a little more on what steps is ICVCM taking to ensure indigenous peoples and local communities are recognized as equal partners, right? As I mentioned, community ownership in carbon market governance, and how can this approach help scale high integrity and high quality restoration finance? Thank you.
That's a very long question, but a very interesting one. Yeah, so I think where we go wrong is assuming that communities do not actually understand what is happening. Where we go wrong is assuming that communities do not understand that, we are in a climate crisis and there is need for climate action. So making sure that we bring them to this conversation and making sure that we bring them to this discussion and these decision-making tables would actually make us have answers that are quite sustainable, right? So within the Integrity Council, as I mentioned earlier, we have representation of both indigenous peoples and local communities across all our governance frameworks, including the governance body that I mentioned earlier, that we have 3 seats reserved for indigenous peoples and local communities. Even within our assessment work and our assessment processes, we rely heavily on making sure that we engage leading experts in the market in informing our work. And this also includes having indigenous peoples and local communities representatives in our expert panel. We also, so making sure that they contribute effectively to our core carbon principles and our assessment framework. We have a department for indigenous peoples and local communities at the Integrity Council, which I am part of, which I think is very critical for any organization that seeks really to represent the voices of the communities, to ensure that they also have a group of people that are actively making sure that this is actually realized, and making sure that all the streams within their work, all the work streams within their work is representative of indigenous peoples and local communities. And that is part of the role that I'm carrying, making sure that within the ICVCM work streams, it represents the voice of the people, it represents the voice of communities, because we will continue creating solutions that are out of touch with local realities if we do not engage indigenous peoples and local communities in these conversations and in these critical areas. In the sense of trying to see how to improve the market and how to ensure that there is high integrity in the carbon market, ICVCM also led out 2 years of consultation with indigenous peoples and local communities, leaders, organizations, market actors, across all the market actors in the carbon market space, and really trying to identify how do we make sure that indigenous peoples as well as local communities actually take part in these processes and are informed of the developments that are happening in the carbon market, so they can also chip in and have a voice and shape this conversation in a way that benefits them. So with that consultation, it led to the birth of the Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities Engagement Forum that is currently being incubated by the ICVCM. But this is an independent, self-led body that actually informs, all the conversations that they have are translated into the ICVCM's work streams. And this is a body that is quite representational in the sense that it is comprised of 8 members. So we have 2 members from Africa, 2 members from Latin America, 2 members from Asia, 1 member from the Northern Hemisphere representing the First Nations, and 1 member from Oceania. So when they held their first meeting last year in June, and interestingly is that in as much as they come from diverse regions, the challenges that both indigenous peoples and local communities face are similar. So they came up with 5 priority areas, and they said, okay, the markets, we normally get developers or investors coming from the global north. How do we make sure that it is easier for indigenous entrepreneurs to actually get into the market? So they are working on a priority area called removing barriers to market entry. They're also really focusing on capacity strengthening and self-strengthening. So really ensuring that this forum becomes a convening space for indigenous peoples and local communities to learn from each other, to share experiences, and for those that are new to the market or want to engage with the market, for them to learn from those that are already in the market on what best practices are. And also, they are focusing on a third, in no particular order, in the third priority area that they're also focusing on is defining best practices for benefit sharing. And they are currently doing a research on exploring the different benefit sharing frameworks to identify which are the frameworks that are actually working, so that they can also be shared and communities can have alternatives of what to really look at when they are, negotiating with the developers that are coming to work in their territories. The fourth priority area that this forum is working on is a critical priority area. I think what we assume is that communities do not understand, right, the climate space, right? So one of these priority areas, the fourth one, is making sure that traditional ecological knowledge and customary governance are embedded into project designs to create that sense of ownership that you're talking about, because they can only own the process and own this conversation if their traditional knowledge is incorporated, if their customary governance systems are incorporated, other than just having formal systems and having science imposed on them. And this is a very interesting conversation on traditional ecological knowledge, because I come from an indigenous community from the northern part of Kenya. We're a pastoralist community. And it is very interesting because we have elders that specialize on reading the intestines of goats, and they can determine if it's going to rain, flood, or if it's going to be, if we're going to have prolonged drought. These are things that you cannot really explain from a science perspective, right? So it's really critical to, bring forth this knowledge to make sure that communities actually feel that, this is actually communicating to us. And just a reflection on also the county government that I come from. They saw the criticality of having this information, because even the meteorological department was not giving the accurate information sometimes. And what they did is now they are ensuring that when they are doing the meteorological data, they also bring forth these elders to confirm and counter-check if this actually makes sense. And most times, you'll find that the med sometimes is not making sense, and the elders sometimes make sense, or sometimes they're aligned, which shows the criticality of ensuring that traditional knowledge is embedded into these processes. And also, we create policies, yes, for community, right? All of us in these conversations that we're having. But then the question is, are they culturally appropriate? Will they pick it up? And that is the aspect of customary governance that is also brought forth. The fifth priority area that this forum is really working on is also on grievance mechanism. So really trying to find appropriate ways and culturally appropriate channels for grievance redress mechanisms. And they have worked on 3 of these 5 priority, and they're continuing to work on the other 2, the traditional ecological knowledge and grievance mechanism. And they will actually be launching their carbon markets engagement strategy, which is very interesting, because I mean it's always the conversation of people imposing strategies on communities, but then now it's communities that have actually come up with a strategy of how they want to be engaged in the carbon market space. And they're now moving from a conversation of, we don't really want to be seen as beneficiaries anymore, because we have the knowledge, we have the skills, we just need, support, and we need our voices also embedded into these processes. So yeah, they will be hosting that tomorrow between at 3:50 to 4:50 at the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion. If you have the time, please go there and check out their strategy. They're also launching the consultation of that strategy, so it's a living document. So they will continue to input their views, and this is some of the work that we're really proud of at the ICVCM of hosting this forum. And we're really seeing that it's fruitful and it's shaping the market in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Stella. Thank you. So, Anshari, in this spirit, right, of what we are hearing here, we understand that to scale restoration as a nature-based solution that works for the landscape requires a lot of time, right? Sometimes we need 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of enabling conditions, right? So that involves human resources, monetary resources. So the carbon finance community has a role to play, right? So from your perspective, how do you think the carbon finance community can ensure this rapid capital deployment happens, but it does not come at the expense of integrity, local rights, or equity?
It's a great question and actually a great discussion. I just wanted to react to some points. Stella, I think on local communities, and also Nani Bani, if I don't butcher your name, I apologize. Right. So throughout the course of these 2 weeks, what I've gathered is there are some very good case studies on how we actually involve indigenous communities. There's a project in Peru where the local communities are co-designing the project itself. And I would think, we are not investors in that project, but I would think a lot of the local knowledge and indigenous communities' knowledge are actually incorporated in one, the design of the project, the operations, but also the benefit sharing. One of the things that we are trying to socialize a bit more, and I think this particularly resonates with local communities, is to change the dialogue from values to value. So what does this mean, right? Yes, it's important to talk about the importance of climate, forest preservation, forest restoration, the benefits to biodiversity. But ultimately, for local communities, they need to see an uplift in their livelihoods, right? And how do we ensure that they understand that there is significant income that can be generated from carbon, right, from carbon credits? And there are ways we are trying to explore. One of our projects in Ghana, which supplies both Article 6 and voluntary carbon market, and it's a restoration project, is really to see how the local communities can have skin in the game. If there is stronger performance in the project, they actually get a higher share of the profit from the sale of the credits itself. These are some creative ways and innovative ways where we can work with local communities, and not just that. I think increasingly the local governments, the state, subnational governments, and also the federal side, essentially, shortly, to summarize, carbon markets is no longer going to be transactional. It's not buyer-seller thing. It's got to be a win-win solution. Everybody has to have a skin in the game. And different countries, different communities, different project types, different projects will have different approaches. And to react to Martin's question, comments on blended finance, and also to your question, one other takeaway is I was in Sao Paulo a week before. The team was in Sao Paulo, and then we spent a week here in Balam. There is capital to be deployed, and there is capital across philanthropies, commercial equity, debt, right? And I think potentially we should explore actively, and maybe some case studies or pilot on where the capital can be best deployed. For example, we take a lot of risks if a project does not come with a feasibility study or project document, right? Is there a way to bring in concessionary capital to fund feasibility studies? Is there a way for concessionary capital or philanthropic capital to look at enhancing more of the community's engagement, right? The biodiversity monitoring. So to your earlier FSC's attempts to look at biodiversity credits, social credits, so there are ways where we can pull different capitals, and I think philanthropies are also looking at benefits beyond climate impact. They are looking at health, social, biodiversity, and there's a way to bring all this together. Still early days, but I think ICVCM is doing quite good work in terms of trying to bring the different elements together and providing that benchmark quality. And we need to give the market time, new projects to come up, working with financiers, with NGOs like WWF to design something that works for everybody. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Anand, I know that you have addressed some of this in your first answer, but for the audience, right, can you please emphasize how does FSC see its ecosystem services certification, for example, or if you want to bring other examples, could evolve or are evolving, right, to play this meaningful role that it is starting to play in carbon finance and restoration markets in the future, especially when it comes to the most needed finance, right, to bring the certainty that the investors need, and also the clarity the community needs, and then the policymakers need, and other players too. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess the main thing that we're doing is moving from this kind of anecdotal payment for ecosystem services markets, which is very much a sponsorship-based market, to make it more mainstream into this credit market, right? So those methodologies connecting it as well. So the other thing that I should have said actually at the start is that the ecosystem services that the categories that we evaluate are firstly not just based on kind of like how are those ecosystems being managed, but but what are the outcomes from those management as well? That's where it's being taken into another. So people that are buying ecosystem services claims are buying outcome claims, not management claims. And there's up to now there's been 5 kind of ecosystem services. So one methodology can, well, one system, if you like, can capture 5 different ecosystem services: biodiversity conservation, carbon sequestration and storage, water services, soil conservation and recreation. And now we're actually building also into that model 2 others, which is air quality and also cultural practices as well, picking up on some of Stella's points as well. So buyers that want to buy those types of ecosystem services can also now access it through one system as well. And again, some of that will then be taken into these credit markets as well. So that's kind of one thing. And then I guess our brand and the claims aspect of it as well, and how we're so strong in the corporate markets already in terms of our brand recognition and consumer recognition. And then we're taking that into more of the investment markets as well, working with different investors as well. And I mean, earlier this year, based on what we've done in the corporate world, we signed a partnership with Mirova, an impact investment fund in Paris, based in Paris. And so there's an investment fund that is raising capital that is looking to invest into FSC forests and provide money to the stewards. So I guess that's the other thing that we're doing. And I guess what we're really trying to do is put the forest stewards, right at the center of our model. How can we make life easier for the forest stewards to access different income streams, as I said, and just moving away from the traditional production income streams that we've used to other ones as well. So I'll leave it there for now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And all of us are so lucky to have this stellar panelists with us, and even luckier because we have time for questions. So let's go to our audience now. I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions, depending on the question and the answer. So I wanted to see who wants to come first to ask a question to the panelists. Could be to a specific panelist or to all of them. Who wants to go first?
Hi, Ben Payton, Reuters Ethical Corporation magazine. Hope you can hear me okay. My question is...
No, we can't hear you. Sorry. Can you just put your microphone a bit more closer to your, or directly?
Okay,
Sorry.
I'm going to swallow it if it's any closer. This is Ben Payton from Reuters Ethical Corporation magazine. My question is mainly for Anshari, but perhaps some others want to weigh in as well. Anshari, you mentioned that the biggest issue is in the carbon markets is around scaling demand. Can I ask, have you seen anything at this year's COP that makes you feel more confident that we're on the way to solving that problem?
Yeah, excellent question. Let me just preface that with what we are observing over the past few years. I think if you go back 2 to 3 years ago, there is a risk of greenwashing. And probably rightly so, right? That corporates are just buying credits without actually directly making attempts to reduce emissions within their scope 1 to scope 3. Fine, right? Then let's say we follow the mitigation hierarchy. The challenge is it's such a litigious environment today that corporates are just not doing anything, right? And you layer that against the broader geopolitical landscape, it's becoming very challenging, right? And so what we are observing is this risk of greenwashing to green hushing. And it's anybody's assessment, right? It's your judge. You judge whether which is worse. Is it greenwashing or green hushing? Now, there are frameworks today, and I have to acknowledge SBTI in trying to assist companies in how they credibly move towards a net zero pathway, right? What it means. And I think we need to look at how carbon credits can be used within a credible decarbonization pathway for corporates, particularly those with challenges in decarbonizing scope 3. Because in many instances, supply chain decarbonization and value chain decarbonization is simply out of their reach, right? And there are hard to abate sectors. We were just talking earlier, potentially some innovative ways where you can look at in-sector credits, right? For aviation, could airlines or passengers or corporates where they have a high travel footprint use sustainable aviation fuel certificates, book and claim, right? For land sector, for high emitting interventions, we provide options for companies to use reforestation credits or forest conservation credits. So there are ways to tackle it. It gives me hope because what I'm observing at this COP is a culmination of feedback from industry to governments over the past 1 or 2 years, where they are looking for clarity on government stance on how corporates can use carbon credits. And I mention again this coalition for scaling carbon markets that's led by UK, Kenya, and Singapore, and a few other pioneer countries. And that outlines a few key set principles on how corporates can actually use carbon credits, whether it's reductions, removals, technology, or nature-based towards their decarbonization pathway. And the work doesn't end at the principle set. I think they have a plan to engage various segments, countries, business communities, NGOs, standards, non-government stakeholders, standard bodies like ICVCM, which includes local communities, indigenous communities. So various form of representation, but that's work to be done, I think, next year. It gives me hope. And let's see. I think probably, realistically speaking, we'll still see market consolidation and pullback probably next year. But I think closer to 27, 28, you'll start to see a pickup in terms of demand, pickup in terms of supply quality also, and potentially everyone realizes come 2030, you cannot get to a net zero world without carbon markets.
Thank you. And we have time for final question. Who is going to be our final question maker?
I heard you have something to offer, Barbara, for the final question. Is that true? Okay. Who has the final question will be regarded with a pin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for the really interesting discussion. My question is just for Stella on... I think you already know that for especially smaller project developers, it can be quite confusing to navigate the realm of which standard and registry to pick, methodologies to apply, and then, oh, should I get a rating for my project? Is that a requirement? And insurance and all of these. So, I mean, going with a standard that has the CCP certification is sort of a no-brainer, of course. But I wonder, does the ICVCM provide guidelines to project developers about, or education to the industry about what they really see as necessary for demonstrating that you have a high-quality project, and what isn't so necessary that we can maybe, miss? Like, is a rating necessary? Is it best to get insurance? What about the discussion of insurance is a sort of secondary insurance on top of the buffer pool already? So, it kind of has a secondary mini question to my first one. Are you guys advocating for the carbon market to finally let go of buffer pools as insurance is stepping in to fill the role that it was meant to, that the buffers were meant to fill, which is that carbon projects need insurance? So, yeah, what are the guidelines to project developers on understanding what's really necessary and what isn't so much? Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. I'd start by saying that the CCPs themselves are already a guideline on how to actually have a high integrity carbon credit, because when you look at our website, it goes ahead and describes the CCPs, the 10 CCPs, into details, such that if a new project developer wants to set up a carbon project, then they will have to look at the guidelines of these CCPs and the requirements of these CCPs, and really looking at what exactly is required for their project to be high integrity. On the aspect of insurance, I may not have a response for you right now, but I'm happy to get back to you, to connect with you after this session, and get back to you. Thanks.
But to respond to your question, some of the standards like Vera, they are exploring beyond buffer pools, insurance, but also potentially other forms of innovative ways. For example, paying a fee into a pool, a fund, that can actually mitigate some of these reversal risks. And this could go into purchasing other credits or topping out the buffer pool. But they are exploring beyond your traditional means of supplementing the buffer pool, what other forms can come in. And increasingly, we are seeing compliance mechanisms like COSIA requiring insurance. It's still a fairly nascent space, but we are hoping that this is an indicator of the industry maturing and advancing. And I do think insurance products will become a key feature in carbon credits origination, particularly when you lay on all the risks that I mentioned in my first statement around regulatory methodology and execution risks. So increasingly, buyers are requiring, compliance schemes are requiring, and it's up to the insurance firms to offer products that meet what the market needs.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're coming at the hour to end our session. I would like to thank Martin, Anand, Nani Barini, Stella, and Shadi. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us here. Those of you who are online watching us. Now we're going to take the official photo. And then I invite you to stay for our next session looking at corporate action. It starts at 5:45, so stay tuned. You have 30 minutes to go somewhere and come back. All right? So let's take a photo here. Thank you so much, everyone.